Hey everybody, this is Blake here, and welcome to my review of The Escape Plan, the newest film by both Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger. So there was obviously a lot of hype surrounding this project because they're taking two of the biggest action titans of all time and pitting them against each other. Finally. Growing up, this was my most reoccurring wet dream. Whereas most people were having wet dreams about sex and girls, I was having wet dreams about Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone sharing screen time together. It's only gay if you really think about it. So yeah, obviously I was really looking forward to this one, which is funny because every time I'd hear about it, it's like nothing about this movie was really exciting me except the fact that it was going to be both Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone together, and that was like enough to override all of my concerns. I guess this is the part where I describe the context, so I tell you my feelings towards both Schwarzenegger and Stallone and go a little bit deeper than I'm a big fan of both men. But there's really not a whole lot to say beyond that. I noticed that as a kid, I think I preferred Schwarzenegger's films by a large margin. Anytime I tried to watch First Blood or Rocky, I'd be so bored out of my mind. I'd much rather watch Commando or Predator or Jingle All the Way. Probably shouldn't say that out loud. See, as a kid, I did not dislike any of Arnold Schwarzenegger's films, and the only movies of his that I've yet to see are Red Sonja and Hercules in New York. I have not seen those two films, but I've seen all of his other flicks as a kid, and I never saw any of them as bad. Now, granted, the only one I've revisited in recent times that is considered bad by the majority of the audiences is Batman and Robin, which, yes, was bad, but as a kid I didn't really think about that. I just enjoyed anything, I guess. But Arnold Schwarzenegger's sense of humor, the cheesy one-liners, the over-the-top action sequences and larger-than-life persona, it just appealed to my sensibilities at the time. But as I grew older and a little bit more mature, I began to prefer Stallone's flicks. You obviously had the normal classics like, Rocky and First Blood, and they deserve all the acclaim they get. Then you have other ones like Cliffhanger, which I think are just as phenomenal. But then you also have some of the guilty pleasures like Cobra. I love Cobra, but it's like it's a perfect marriage between campy and dark and edgy that it just something about it really just appealed to my current sensibilities. And I guess beyond that, why did I prefer Stallone a little bit more? Well, I've always felt that Stallone's movies generally were targeted towards adults, whereas Arnold was always aiming for younger audiences. It seems like even Arnold's darker movies like Terminator or Predator, I still loved those as a kid, and I always felt that when you deal with robots and those kinds of aliens, it's just what kids want. Whereas it seems like Stallone's movies were a little bit more introspective and I don't know. As a kid, like I tried to watch Cobra once and I couldn't really get into it, but as an adult, I love it. So it's just interesting how my tastes have shifted, but I'd still call myself a big Arnold and Stallone fan. I think I prefer Stallone a little bit more these days. Also, I'll talk about, even though I'll discuss a little bit more when I start discussing The Escape Plan, I've always felt that Stallone was a better actor than Arnold, but the difference is Stallone, when he gives a good performance, it's a really good performance, or at least it's a solid performance, but when he gives a bad performance, it's really noticeable and it's kind of awkward to watch. Whereas Arnold, he never really gave any concretely good performances, but at the same time, he's always entertaining even when he's doing a bad job. So even though Batman and Robin definitely pushed it with the frickin' ice puns, I still thought he was obviously having a blast, and at least he's having fun in the movie, and I enjoyed watching him a little bit more than the others. So yeah, that's enough about the context. Let's get into The Escape Plan itself. Now, when I first heard about this movie, I was a little concerned because when you take two of the biggest action stars and trap them in a prison movie formula, that just seems to have so few possibilities. I have nothing against prison escape thrillers. I've enjoyed plenty of them, but it just seems like an odd choice to put Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone in. I want more spectacle. I want more action. And you can't really do a whole lot in this setting. Then when they released the trailers, nothing about them was really exciting me either. I thought the trailers looked fine, but generally, it wasn't enough to get my blood pumping. Then again, The Last Stand didn't have a great trailer either, whereas Bullet to the Head did, so I guess I shouldn't really consider that too much. And of course, when it was released for the critics, it had a very lukewarm reception, but still that didn't bother me too much because The Expendables wasn't very well received by the critics. So I decided that, even though all this stuff was really worrying me, the fact that Arnold and Stallone were going to be together, and I'm not talking just like The Expendables where Arnold's just in a cameo or a small role, they were going to actually share the majority of the screen time together, that just overrode everything, and I could not wait to see this, and so I saw it, and was it a disappointment? Yes, but it's still pretty good. Once again, I don't think the escape plan is bad or anything. It might even be good, or at least closer to being good than it is to being bad, and I was really entertained, but I still felt that it was a mistake to put Arnold and Sylvester Stallone in a frickin' prison movie. That still baffles me, and that really probably affected my opinion of the overall film. I know that's a crap criticism. It's not fair. It's just my subjective feelings, so take that as you will. But in itself, I think it is a pretty good movie. So this is going to be a little difficult to review, though, because I have a lot of bad things I could say and not as many good things, but it's like the good things are more important than the bad things, so I think it's overall a much more enjoyable experience, but I'm afraid that I'm either going to sound too positive or too negative. So hopefully I could deliver my points in a coherent manner, and you could understand everything I'm trying to say. So, well, first off, in terms of the action, just as I suspected, there isn't a whole lot of it. Most of the gunfires and the explosions occurs at the very end, and it's all fairly standard stuff, nothing too explosive. There isn't a whole lot of spectacle to be found, which once again was what I wanted out of a movie that has both Arnold and Sly together. But none of it is bad. Luckily, I think if you just take it as a prison thriller, it is actually a very enjoyable and fast-paced movie. It's about 2 hours long, but I never became bored. I never became agitated. At no point did I feel it was lagging or spending too much time on something. I was just as entertained in the last 20 minutes as I was in the first 20 minutes, and I was very entertained in those first 20 minutes. So that's a good thing. It's interesting watching these characters interact with this prison too, because the prison itself is actually fairly unique in design, but also really grounded in reality. This is not just a normal prison. I don't want to spoil too much, but based on what you see in the trailers, it's very high tech. I love the holding cells, but also there's certain unique quirks to the movie that I thought really stood out, such as the prisoners wearing the guards wearing these kinds of scary masks. Besides being kind of creepy and not something you see every day in a prison flick, there's also a practical reason for it, in that it becomes really difficult to tell who is who, and you can't really map out patterns that you could exploit when trying to escape this prison. And that was what I thought was really interesting, is seeing Stallone, who actually thinks of these his character is thinking of these real clever and inspired ideas as to how to escape the prison. He's trying to go through his normal routine when he first arrives at this main prison, and he keeps being just thrown off by how effective this prison is at making sure you cannot escape. But at the same time, he soon learns to adapt, and seeing him make up these plans and then executing these plans, complete with stumbling blocks and close calls, it's very compelling and very exciting. So that made up for the lack of action, in my opinion. Of course, the big thing is, how fun is it to see Stallone and Schwarzenegger together? Well, for one, I was a little disappointed that this really wasn't... I guess I was expecting a film where they shared the screen time, or not, shared the main character status, sort of like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, for example, or even they could have done something like the Forbidden Kingdom, where you have a main character who's not the two big stars, but they are able to balance all their screen time around this character. Maybe that wouldn't have worked so much though, because they probably would have cast somebody like Shia LaBeouf or Taylor Lautner, real hardcore action stars, which I would not want to see. But it's much more Stallone's movie. Schwarzenegger is the main, the support lead, sort of like how Jason Statham is definitely the second main character of the Expendables movie, but he's still under Stallone, which in itself isn't bad because I am a big Stallone fan. In terms of their acting, Stallone did a really good job. Everybody likes to say he's a bad actor. I disagree. I think he's actually a very underrated actor. He's a limited actor, but within those limitations, I think he actually can shine. But here, yeah, it's his usual stellar work. I liked how his character is shown not to be as badass as Stallone usually is, but he's incredibly smart. And I thought Stallone actually was surprisingly convincing in the role. He was very articulate, and everybody likes to make fun of his voice, that he sounds all garbled. I actually had no problems with him in this movie. Everything he said sounded very clear, but there's a lot of acting in his character. He's a lot more introspective than Schwarzenegger is in general. Like, there's a lot of acting with his eyes, since he can't really do too much with his face, and to me that is a very effective way to convey a character, and Stallone did a great job. Schwarzenegger is a little bit more difficult to pin down because he's toning down his usual strengths. Usually he's much more larger than life in terms of his personality. He's very charismatic, and here you get some of that, but for the most part I felt that he was kind of using Stallone's style of acting, where he is much more low-key than usual, and luckily his dialogue delivery has improved a lot since The Last Stand, where he was a little rusty, and I'm not just referring to his accent or his voice. I've always felt that his characters probably spoke English as a second language, but I'm talking like in The Last Stand he had moments where it seemed like he was just reciting his lines out loud. There wasn't a whole lot of emotion, or the emotions that were coming out sounded odd. But here he was much more consistent, and he did a good job. And just watching him and Stallone together is great. It's enough. It's really worth seeing The Escape Plan for, just for that. The supporting cast is actually, I think, where a lot of the money went, and I was surprised at how many big, I don't want to say big stars, but recognizable people that I noticed, such as Sam Neill, Vincent D'Onofrio, Jim Caviezel, and a lot of other recognizable faces, and 50 Cent, oddly. But here's the thing that I was very split about. All these characters are incredibly interesting. The actors portray them very well, and I like how even minor characters have interesting quirks, such as Vincent D'Onofrio's character is, he's constantly, he seems like kind of a germaphobe, like he's constantly wiping his hands. I like that kind of stuff, but at the same time, the film is so successful when it comes to making its supporting cast interesting that you want more of them, and it becomes more jarring when they have a very limited amount of screen time. Even 50 Cent's character, they kind of set him up as if he's going to be very important, but he never really becomes that important. My personal favorite was Jim Caviezel as the villain. I even thought he stole the show from both Arnold and Sly. He's just so cold, and it's an interesting mix of creepy, yet cold, and almost scientific, yet all around he's just a character that you love to hate, and he was awesome in my opinion. I loved him in this movie. One thing I did feel is that the film thinks it has a stronger plot than it really does. There's some twists that are supposed to be like, oh crap, but instead they're just so underdeveloped that it's just like, eh. Like there's this big reveal involving one of the characters, I won't say who in case I'd accidentally spoil it, at the very end, and it's supposed to be like this big, oh wow moment, but it's not. It was just kind of lazily handled, and I was totally indifferent to much of the story, and various backstories of the characters didn't really, I don't know, stand out as they should have, because there's not a whole lot of build up to them, especially when it came to Stallone's backstory. It just kind of like, oh, okay, I guess he had to have something like that, but the way it went down, I just thought it was more awkward than interesting. But I can't tell if this was written to be a Stallone and Sly or a Stallone and Schwarzenegger vehicle, or if it was just a normal prison thriller that was converted into a Stallone and Schwarzenegger vehicle. If it's the latter, then this probably did have a much better script originally, but they had to maybe dumb it down in order to make it the proper Stallone and Schwarzenegger vehicle. If it was the opposite, then maybe they were a bit too ambitious and they bit off more than they can chew. But still, that never stopped the escape plan from being entertaining. One last thing I wanted to say: the attempts at having one-liners was stupid. There's some really funny parts. I liked for example, the cheese gag. But like at the very end, Schwarzenegger has a classic one-liner moment, and the line itself is just very generic, and they try to make it sound awesome. But to me, the line was just so mundane that it just didn't really work out. But at least at the very end, you do see some classic Schwarzenegger stuff. I loved when he wields that machine gun. So that was cool. But the escape plan isn't very memorable. It's not exceptional in any way. It's not going to go down as one of their better films. I'd say it's much better than Stallone's previous movie, which was A Bullet to the Head, which I just thought was mediocre, maybe even a little below average. But I think I preferred The Last Stand, Schwarzenegger's newest movie, prior to this, a little bit more. I thought that was just a little bit more entertaining. But The Escape Plan is a solid film, but it's not going to be considered one of their best flicks, in my opinion. So that's all I have. Would I recommend you see it in the theaters? If you want. This is the type of movie that it's good enough that if you want to see it in theaters, I think it's worth seeing in theaters. If you want to wait till it comes out on DVD, then I'd say it's worth waiting on DVD. And if you don't really want to see it at all, it's not good enough to change your mind. But I really do hope it does well, because I suspect it won't. But I always worry that if something like this bombs, it might affect the future of the Expendables, and I want to see more and more Expendables movies. So hopefully it does okay. I did written reviews of everything except this. What did I do? Glimmerman, one of Steven Seagal's older movies. I Spit on Your Grave 2. And I think that's all I've done recently. So yeah, read those, please. Check out my Machete Kills review. And that's all I've got. I hope you enjoyed this video. I apologize if it was a little bit too long. But I'll see you guys later.